Number 9. Walt Disney's private airplane. During the planning stages for what would eventually become Disney World in Orlando, Walt Disney flew back and forth between California and Florida on a Grumman G-159 aircraft codenamed the Mouse. Throughout 1964 and 1965, it ferried Disney and other company executives between the two destinations once a week. This made it the most utilized Gulfstream in worldwide corporate service, according to WDW News Today. It was retired in 1992 in favor of a corporate jet. For a long time, the Grumman was on display at Disney's Hollywood Studios. In 2018, it was discovered in a backstage area, where it was apparently being stored after it was removed from public view. 2 years later, aerial photos revealed that the plane had been covered in what appeared to be a protective tarp. It's unclear whether the company has any plans for the aircraft or if it'll end up back on public display at any point. Number 8. Jin Shui Yuan 2. In early 2022, offshore oil rig workers spotted a vessel listing in the Gulf of Thailand in the middle of the night. The 262-foot-long ship featured Chinese characters that translate to Jin Shui Yuan 2. Its crew was nowhere to be found, and it contained no cargo or identifying documents, but was full of guns, leaving its origins and purpose a mystery. Authorities said that the ship's bridge appeared as if it were abandoned in a hurry, and that its galley looked as if it hadn't been used in quite some time. The Thai Navy attempted to tow the vessel to the coast, but it sank in rough weather, leaving a kilometers-long wide oil leak in its wake. They issued a notice advising its owner to remove it within the next 15 days. An expert speculated that the ship may have been an illegal oil tanker making deliveries to various countries. If that's the case, it would have likely gone a long time without maintenance, since it's difficult for an illegal vessel to find a place to dock, which would perhaps explain its abandonment. Number 7. Out-of-place fighter jet. In the hilly forest of northern New Jersey near West Milford, there's a wrecked fighter jet that sits in pieces among the brush. An outdoorsman discovered it while hunting deer in the woods in the early 2000s, and was surprised that he never knew about it, having lived in the area for over 40 years. Trees have grown all around the wreck, indicating that it's been there for many years, yet when the man asked other locals if they knew about it, they said they didn't. The hunter contacted Weird New Jersey about the mysterious jet, and it published a story in hopes that a reader might know more about the aircraft's origins. According to a letter sent in by a reader, the jet crashed in 1967. After receiving reports about the accident, police followed the smell of smoke and sheared treetops to find the wreck. The area surrounding the plane was on fire, and the pilot was sitting on its wing in a dazed and confused state. 30 feet away, sitting against a tree, was the pilot's friend. Luckily, neither of the men had life-threatening injuries. They revealed that the aircraft went down during a routine training mission, but the exact cause of the crash remains unclear to this day. The military removed the engine but left the rest of the downed plane at the site. Due to the condition of the wreck, its make and model are not immediately clear by looking at it. An old photo revealed that it's a Marine Lockheed Martin T-2V Sea Star. Around 150 of the aircraft were built starting in the 1950s, and they were retired in the 1970s. Only one known airworthy Sea Star still exists, and there are 2 preserved planes on display at museums, making the wreck one of only a handful of remaining examples of the aircraft. Number 6. B-307 submarine. Measuring just under 300 feet long and 29 feet across their widest point, the Tango-class submarines were the Soviet Union's largest class of conventional submarines ever built. The first Tango-class vessels entered service in 1972, and 18 were built between then and 2016, when the last one in service was decommissioned. 3 of the retired subs have been preserved. One of them, known as B-307, sits at a park complex in Tolyatti. It was launched in 1980 as the 14th Tango-class vessel. The sub served primarily in the Mediterranean Sea and parts of the Atlantic for 9 years before being taken out of service in 1989. This was due to the Soviet Union's declining economy. It was initially placed on reserve, but it never saw service again. B-307 was struck from the Naval Register in 2001 and slated for scrapping, but the Autovaz Technical Museum bought it and spared it from being dismantled. In 2003, it was mounted on specially built pontoons and began the long and complicated journey to its new home. It took over a year before the submarine was moved to shore, at which point it was moved along a specially built road to its current location. If you had the chance to travel across the ocean in a submarine, would you? Tell us in the comments below and hit the subscribe button while you're at it. Number 5. Experimental Soviet aircraft. Starting in the 1960s, Soviet engineers began experimenting with ground effect vehicles, which resembled space-age airplanes but operated much differently than traditional aircraft. These unusual machines, known as ekranoplanes, generated lift by flying roughly 13 feet above the water, which made them difficult for enemies to detect. Known as the ground effect, this created a cushion of air for the vehicle to glide along. During the 1970s, the Soviets designed the Lun-class ekranoplane based on a previously built prototype nicknamed the Caspian Sea Monster. Only one Lun ekranoplane was ever built to completion. Known as the MD-160, it served for the Soviet and Russian navies from 1987 to sometime during the late 90s. Measuring 242 feet long and with a 140-foot wingspan, the colossal 63-foot-tall aircraft dwarfed modern-day jumbo jets. It had a maximum cruising speed of 340 miles per hour and was operated by a 15-person crew. Throughout its service life, it was the world's heaviest aircraft. It carried 6 supersonic missile launchers and was equipped for anti-surface warfare. The MD-160 was stored on a purpose-built dry floating dock, which was towed out into the water and sunk beneath the ekranoplane, leaving it ready to power up and go. It could remain self-sufficient for up to 5 days before it needed any servicing. A new Lun-class model was around 90% finished when the program was abruptly cancelled due to a lack of funds. The existing MD-160 was taken out of service. Until 2020, the retired aircraft sat in a naval base in Kaspiysk, Russia. It was towed to a beach in Dagestan along the Caspian Sea coast, where it remains today as a tourist attraction. Number 4. The MV Kalakala. The iconic passenger and car ferry MV Kalakala entered service in Washington's Puget Sound on the 4th of July in 1935. Famous for its spacecraft-like Art Deco design and luxury accommodations, it soon became recognized as the world's second most photographed object. In addition to offering ferry service, the 270-foot-long ship was used for moonlight cruises, hosting a live dance orchestra. It was voted top attraction among visitors during the 1962 Seattle World's Fair, second only to the Space Needle in popularity. While the Kalakala had an appealing, unique look, its aircraft-inspired design proved impractical in several ways. It had a small wheelhouse with poor visibility, and its vehicle carrying capacity was reduced by 40% in the years following World War II as American cars got wider. Passengers had an increasingly difficult time squeezing between the vehicles when they boarded and disembarked from the ferry. During the 1950s, more efficient vessels were designed, and by the end of the decade, the Kalakala was obsolete. But it continued to provide ferry service until its retirement in 1967. It was briefly used as a crabbing ship in Alaska before returning to Washington under its former owner's plans to restore it, which never happened. The Kalakala languished in Puget Sound for years until it was finally scrapped in 2015. Number 3. Remote Train Graveyard. There's a collection of mysterious abandoned trains rusting away on a vast tract of land in north-central Bangkok. It's hidden within Thailand's largest freight depot, where it sits derelict and forgotten, and in stark contrast to the many locomotives that drive past it every day. One urban explorer who runs the photography blog Spectral Kodaks visited the site and took the time to research some of the decaying cars. The findings revealed that some of them were manufactured in the US by Davenport Locomotive Works, a company that went out of business in 1956, which speaks to how old some of the trains are. Many of the cars were traced to a series of Herschel diesel hydraulic locomotives that were built during the early 1960s. A security guard told photographer Dax Ward that the collection has been at the site for around 20 years. Nobody seems to know what the cars were used for before they arrived or anything else about their past. There's one other train graveyard in Bangkok known as Makasan. It's located on the outskirts of the city. It can be seen while riding the train from the airport to the city center, but it's strictly off-limits to the public. The sprawling 186-acre site functions primarily as a state-owned repair yard. In 2018, authorities granted CNN journalists a rare look at the property, which is reportedly filled with rows upon rows of aging and overgrown train cars in varying conditions, including around 1,000 passenger carriages. Some are completely destroyed from being in accidents, while others are visibly dated but otherwise seem to be in good condition. The collection spills over into the nearby woods, where there are a pair of World War II-era Japanese steam engines that once ran along the country's rail line into neighboring Myanmar. Number 2. Soviet missile carriers. In a part of Russia that was once an impassable swamp, the ground has started to dry up in recent years, giving explorer and Instagrammer Oleg Tsurkan a chance to ride beyond it for the first time with his ATV. Deep in the wilderness, he spotted some rusting barbed wire and carefully followed it, eventually coming on a pair of rusting Soviet-era 8x8 vehicles. There was no obvious signs to indicate what the machines might have been used for, but it was clear that they had been languishing in the forest for a very long time. The vehicles were stripped of many of their parts, making it even more difficult to identify their exact purpose. Inside the cab of one of the massive trucks, Tsurkan spotted a lever and realized it was used by the Soviet army to transport ballistic missiles. By doing some additional research, he discovered that the vehicle wasn't used for launching missiles, but for providing necessary support. A trailer attached to the truck functioned as a living space for troops, with designated cooking, resting, and planning areas. There are as many as 10 different rooms separated by a narrow corridor and sliding doors. The exact make and model of the vehicles are unknown. Like many other Soviet relics, they were likely abandoned after the Iron Curtain fell in the early 90s. At the time, the countries of the former Soviet Union were busy resuscitating their infrastructure and militaries, and the money to upkeep many of the USSR's ambitious programs was no longer there. And at number 1, ZIL E-167. During the Soviet era, the state devoted a lot of money to designing experimental all-terrain vehicles for a variety of purposes and environments. Over a period of just 2 months during the early 1960s, engineers developed a 6-wheeled off-road truck called the ZIL E-167. Its intended purpose was to be able to withstand Siberia's harsh climate, which meant that it would ideally be capable of navigating in snow and rough terrain. The heavy-duty vehicle was also designed to make water crossings. Powered by 2 8-cylinder engines, this 10-foot-tall, 30-foot-long beast was an imposing force. Its operators could control its tire pressure, and it was also equipped with air cleaning systems, a system for pumping water in the event of a fire, and radio transmission capabilities. With 6-foot tires and 33-inch ground clearance, the ZIL E-167 traversed boulders, ravines, uneven ground, and up to 3 feet of snow with ease. Only one prototype was ever built. Throughout its testing phase, it covered around 12,500 miles of ground throughout Russia and only got stuck to the point of needing to be towed once. As impressive as it was, the vehicle had its drawbacks, including a shockingly low fuel efficiency of just 2.3 miles to the gallon, or about 1 kilometer to each liter. Its size also meant that it wasn't usable on most public roads, which was a crucial requirement for a vehicle of its kind. Plans to build 2 more units were ultimately scrapped, most likely in favor of a more widely produced vehicle. The sole prototype has been restored and is on display at the State Military Technical Museum in Ivanovskoye. Thanks for watching. Which one of these abandoned vehicles is your favorite? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.